Welcome to another episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers, where we dive into the intersection of manufacturing, military, economy, politics, American culture, and the essence of life itself. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, and today we have an amazing guest joining us. Our guest today is Darin Gaub, a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, defense strategist, and a voice of wisdom on national security, military operations, and the ever-evolving landscape of geopolitical affairs. With over 28 years of distinguished service, Darin has been at the forefront of some of the most critical missions and strategic planning in recent history. His insights into the military's role in shaping our economy, politics, and culture are invaluable. In this episode, we will explore the innovations in military technology and how they trickle down to impact civilian life. We'll discuss the current state of our national defense, the challenges we face in an increasingly complex world, and the importance of maintaining a strong manufacturing base to support our military and economic prowess. So, whether you're a defense enthusiast, a policy wonk, or simply curious about the forces shaping our nation, this episode promises to deliver thought-provoking discussions and expert analysis. Stay tuned as we welcome Darin Gaub to Full Spectrum Frontiers.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me join today. My name is Darin Gaub, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. I started out enlisted and went through a few enlisted ranks before getting out of the Army, and planned on staying out of the Army and running businesses, and then through a long story, ended up getting called back into the military and spent the next 22 years as an officer and flying Blackhawks. And had the pleasure of commanding the majority of a brigade down in Fort Carson, and then in the Air Assault Battalion made of 30 Blackhawks there as well. In the mix of all that, standard Army officer stuff is although you are a specialist like me, aviation officer and Blackhawk community, I was also a strategist, going through some schools and training and actually employing the art of strategy, which surprises a lot of people that when we are talking strategy in the military, the application of military force is usually the last thing we get to, because we go through economics and various other things first. But and I realize that's getting into a little bit beyond just introductory, but I retired in August 2019 out of Fort Carson, Colorado, came back to Montana, where I'm happily residing now and probably forevermore. And working on a nationwide nonprofit, working on an international veterans coalition, working a variety of things within the political sphere, because I figured, since I don't like politics in general and don't like politicians most of the time, I don't want them trying to rule over me either. So I'm going to step in along with many of my other fellow veterans who are doing the same thing and make sure that this country has leadership where it is needed most, even if it's very local, national, statewide, doesn't matter. So I encourage all veterans to do that. And so that's what I'm doing now, while also showing up on Fox News, Newsmax, and other news outlets talking about the geopolitical spectrum and what all is going on out there and why. So
I always love that geopolitical spectrum.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's kind of why we've got you here today, because you touched on a few of those things. And as you know, this podcast is called Full Spectrum Frontiers, and it's this concept of full spectrum, fill in the blank, right? Kind of, whether it's warfare, national defense, infrastructure, it goes the gamut, right? So I was really excited to have you on to help us maybe put a definition out there for what we're talking about when we say full spectrum frontiers, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think this is one of those cases where just because you slap a new label on something that's been going on for hundreds of years doesn't necessarily fundamentally change it.
And
It's
that's
just a,
amazing.
and so when someone talks to me about full spectrum warfare, high intensity conflict, all these kinds of terms, um, I kind of go back to not only that the global strategist type of work that I've done for years, but also to my train when I was a trainer. I trained. I was part of a team training 33 Army brigades and one Marine battalion that deployed to Detroit, Iraq, or Afghanistan out of Fort Irwin, California, and we employed all of these terms. And it was always interesting to come back and tell people that when you're saying high intensity conflicts, full spectrum operations, irregular warfare, and all this kind of stuff, when you when you describe what it looks like, it doesn't look in the end like anything different than what's been
Right.
happening for decades. You're going to mix in some new technology. You might mix in some new tactics that are driven by some of those technologies, as well as lessons learned and things like that. But ultimately, it just comes back to the idea that warfare at a certain level, let's just say, let's just use Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas, and what's going on there
Yep.
in using the idea of full spectrum operations. Well, ultimately, it's using every element of national power in order to gain an advantage over another people group or nation in pursuit of a victory. And so it's not just playing around with tanks, soldiers, and artillery and stuff on a battlefield. We're talking about the logistics behind it, the supply chains, the economics, the messaging, the information warfare piece of this, which is what do you tell home audiences? What do you tell foreign audiences? What do you tell your enemy? What is it true? Is it deception? Is it something else? Um, it's in today's day and age. It's what about space and what can space operations bring you? What about you know, unmanned drones? Be they water, airborne, landborne, because we have drone tanks and robots and all this kind of stuff, which
Absolutely.
are employed to fight warfare, just like the latest technologies were employed in warfare in World War One and World War Two, in Korea and Vietnam and on. That's just the nature of conflict. Use the latest technology to your advantage. The side of the equation, I guess, that adapts fastest gains advantage first. Then the opposite side adjusts to what you're doing, and that it's an arm wrestling match, and that's the way warfare has always been. And so, full spectrum ops today is the same as full spectrum operations in World War II because that was national economies, that was information, that was deception, all of these things. So when we put that label on it, even today, it comes back to it's the same thing. You can only go so far to find something that of significant difference
Right.
in how things are done. So, um, using that training, my training hat that I wore for so many years, tried to get that through to people is that don't just stick a new label on something and assume that it is completely different. You have to start with the fundamentals and go from there. But remember that the goal is to employ all the other aspects of national power before you start talking about employing military forces at most of the time. Have we maxed out our ability to engage in diplomacy? Have we, trade talks?
Yeah,
All,
diplomatic and economic measures, right?
right.
Um, and people so easily forget that exactly like you said, and I love that it's the same. This is just it's once again it's the what is the adage? Know your history or else you're doomed to repeat it, right?
Right. You are, yeah, absolutely. And we're doing it. I mean, it's what happens when you allow Iran to profit significantly off oil sales? Well, they fund Hamas. Surprise, guess what? They've always done that. And every
Right.
time Obama did it, and Biden did it, and anybody else, same result. And so, if someone is listening to this and has never heard this acronym, I would encourage them to think of the word dime, like the dime in your pocket, and that's diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. That's a simple way to just think about that. You're trying to take the entire weight, the entire power of a nation through those elements to defeat an enemy wherever, doesn't matter where it is.
Right.
And if you can win diplomatically, which is always preferred, then you still win. It's
Absolutely.
and it's still conflict. And in some ways you could say you win better because you don't have young soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, and whoever else out there dying for a preventable war. I don't know. Let's call that Ukraine. Entirely preventable, more than likely,
Right.
through diplomatic measures and information. So, and we have not seen a diplomatic success for a lot of years, and the world reflects that. So that's what I would encourage people to think about is that things really truly haven't changed
Right.
ultimately. And there are many things that military strategists do in the world of full spectrum, or however you want to describe it, that are done before you even remotely start talking about, hey, I need to move an aircraft carrier here. Well, we may
Right.
not have to if we can win this thing diplomatically.
Well, this is one of those problems that I think, and it's not just our country. There's other countries as well, in Europe and other countries around that. I mean, when you're in the military, right? It's confirmation bias to an extent. It's everything because you're a hammer and everything looks like a nail, right?
Right.
So I really love encouraging people is that you've got to open your mind to the whole picture instead of just everything looks like a nail, right? And you are
Right.
more than just a hammer. That you can talk things out, you can do other things. It's not everything is just, grab it and smash it. It's not how it all
No.
works. But but you would think, even politically, right? Diplomatically, that is kind of how things unfortunately hash out sometimes, right? Especially
Yeah.
recent or we just ignore it. And
Yeah.
it's equally as bad on the other side, like things like Afghanistan and debacles like that, or just people sitting on their hands and not reacting, correct? And
Correct.
these are not new problems. And just like we've said, and this is one of those things I really want to push forward is that just redefining it doesn't change anything. And I
Right. And
find that
yeah.
go ahead.
No. Yeah, you're leaning towards the next point, which was we're getting kind of into a philosophical side of the argument. But I think out of philosophies come doctrines, and doctrines drive how things are employed on the ground, air, or wherever. And if you can understand the philosophy of solving problems through the least dangerous means possible, then you're at least going to start your foreign policy from the right place. Because executives lean towards military because it's the easiest for them to employ.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why there's a check on the executive in the United States through the Constitution. That there's plenty of argument there about how well it's being used, but we have to exhaust other means. But the people tend to be impatient to allow diplomacy to work, sometimes to allow information to work, to allow economics to work. And they want to go for the deploy your aircraft carrier now, put them here, launch planes, and bomb somebody. Oh, okay. Well, you may have just put the gasoline or even water on an oil fire.
Right. Right.
Let's think back a little bit and realize that, I don't know, maybe a simple promise to Russia to not allow Ukraine into NATO would have prevented an invasion there,
Right.
something like that.
And that's
Yeah,
part
and
of the issues with like the switching of leaders, right? It,
yeah,
sometimes just because prior administrations say one thing doesn't mean the next administration upholds said
right.
promise, right?
Key word there is promises. The same ones that said we wouldn't expand NATO, and the same ones that Ukraine believed we'd secure them when they gave up their nuclear weapons. That's the challenge of many nations dealing with the U.S. is our strength is our weakness when it comes to constantly changing out our executive and their methods and visions. So we are where we are, but we have to accept that it's a positive too. And I think that's one of the critical things, though, is for people who have zero military experience or exposure to us when they hear that, for example, I'm a military strategist. Well, the better term actually is that geopolitical strategist piece, because when as we train and employ ourselves in how we work and do things, we're actually an arm of diplomacy as much as we are anything. As I've talked to leaders across multiple European nations, and we're ambassadors. We're just ambassadors in uniform with specific roles. I've worked with Department of State, Department of Justice, and many others in my role as a military strategist. But like I said before, you know, at the levels I was working at, the last thing we talk about is the employment of military force to a location with a vision or end state in mind of use of those forces for something. We worked with these other agencies to attempt to focus on how we use them so we don't have to use us. And by
Right,
doing so, no one gets hurt. We can preserve our resources for actual real emergencies, and be, I guess, better stewards of the peace that we're hoping to maintain in as many places as we can. So if someone hears that someone's like a military strategist, works at the international level, we just because we wear a uniform doesn't mean that that's the first. We don't want to just walk around with a hammer. We prefer to be a tool belt.
right,
We're going to pull
right,
out whatever we need to prevent conflict from happening, that ends in the shedding of blood.
right.
So,
Well, that's pretty awesome. Um, I mean, so I mean, I just thought something popped into my head. I'll just put it out there, but it's kind of like that nation building aspect to an extent,
mm,
right? Not
yeah,
and that is nation building in itself is kind of gotten a bad. It's become a kind of a naughty bad term to an extent, right? It doesn't sound good. Nation building. Oh well, we invade and then we nation build, right? Um,
yeah,
it can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? For sure.
yeah,
And it takes me back all the way. I don't know why, and I have to say it's like I think of like way back to like the Roman army, right? Is that all of those soldiers were also engineers and builders and construction folks, and they built the aqueducts and they built all this infrastructure as well, right? Um,
yep.
our current military sort of can do the same things. Um, oh,
Yeah, I tell you, the National Guard is a perfect example of that, where you get both. Because I mean, you get a guy who comes in as a junior enlisted person, and you get talking to them, and you realize they build houses on the outside,
right,
or they plumbers and electricians, or actual civil engineers and stuff. It's like we can nation build. One, do we want to? Two, can we afford to? And three, do they even want us to?
right. And that's a huge one right there, right? Do they even want us to? Like, because I always would put forward, people are like, well, you want to go help these people. And I'm like, well, maybe they don't want our help. Why? Why are we, like truly like think about it. And then I flip it around on them and I'm like, would you like an armed force to like, let's say you live in Sheridan, Wyoming. Do you want an armed force of any soldiers strolling around your town, your city, um, just occupying it and building stuff and doing this and doing that, or and then coming and trying to chat with, the leadership. That's what we're doing in a lot of these
Yeah.
instances, right? And I don't think you guys would like that. You might,
Right.
but a lot of people wouldn't.
If you've got problems, don't you want to solve them yourself without all this external help that doesn't know you, your customs, and all the other history? Probably
Exactly.
not.
And
But
doesn't
I
even
mean,
speak your language probably, right?
right. But what can Americans take away from this besides the fact that nation building is another term that you have to ask a little deeper about what you mean by it. Um, Getting into that whole idea of how does this align with the full spectrum operations piece, or unlimited warfare, if you want to call it from the Chinese perspective.
Right.
Well, other nations are doing nation building against the United States right now.
Mhm.
And those soldiers, those weapons, those things that are coming into the United States, just like the American soldiers went into Iraq to liberate, or whatever you want to call it.
Liberate, right?
Uh, those things are coming into America, but what are they coming into America disguised as? Well, they're non-governmental organizations.
Mhm.
They're transnational organizations. They're fake charities that are funneling illegal aliens across our southern border. It's direct funding to corrupt and compliant politicians and judges and lawyers, and you name it. It's ideologies. It's Confucius institutes in our colleges and universities across the country. So I don't know, maybe a balloon that floated over my kid's house up here by Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana.
Right.
All of these things are weapons being used against the United States, not in the normal sense of what we would call nation building, but in another way it is, because what they're trying to do is build this country into something that is more compliant to their goals than our own national security interests.
Right. Trying
So
to
we can flip that around.
infiltrate, right? Infiltrate the society.
Great. Change it from within without most people even realizing it.
It's the boiling frog
Yep.
analogy, right? The just slowly keep turning up the heat, and the frog doesn't even realize it's being boiled until it's too late.
Right. And I think we're sitting at the brim of the pot right now. And
Yeah,
there's a whole bunch of us that are just trying to dump in ice.
right. Dumping ice, screaming for ice. Bring the
Right.
ice.
It's like, it's all of this stuff. It's United Nations global climate issues. Um, it's like that has nothing to do with preserving the climate. I
Right,
can do that just fine where I'm at. I
right.
don't need any kind of 18 or 19 United Nations climate goals. That is a
Mm,
way to infiltrate and influence environmental social governance, and manipulate currencies and track people's social credit scores, which we're not far away from, just like China.
yep.
um, you know if it worked in China, they're going to try it here.
They're gonna try it here. Right. We talk about diversity, right? In that aspect, and it seems like a lot of times when diversity is talked about, it's all very one way. And when you talk about that, just bringing these things up, and we talk about in the aspect of nation building and things along those lines, is that not all communities, even within the United States, are the same. They're not. We have different cultures. We have different your needs in Bozeman are different than my needs in Syracuse. They just are. Like
Yeah,
there is
yeah,
not. So it's this idea of everything is a square hole or a round hole, and that's just not the case. We have all kinds of different shapes, sizes, colors. Everything is different, right? And I just don't understand how we don't see it that way. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even that we don't see it that way. It's like it's okay that we're different, right? It's okay that
yeah.
what you need in Bozeman is not what I need in Syracuse, or what is needed in Miami, Florida. Like we all have different problems. We all have different challenges, right?
Yep.
This
Yeah,
is
but
not
what if Bozeman spent all their money trying to prepare for an emergency for a hurricane while Miami prepared all their emergency stuff for a blizzard?
right. And it just
You
doesn't
know?
make any sense. It's absolutely ridiculous, right? But I
Yep.
think this happens every day, all the time. And it's just that this is what we're here for, is to kind of enlighten the fact that, you know, uh, I think that certain concepts have been hijacked, including full spectrum, right? Have been hijacked by with people with an agenda. And I just want to open people's eyes to that.
Right.
Um,
A lot of people are
it
competing for some sort of
permeates
intellectual prize. And
it permeates everything. So
well, I mean, yeah, this goes back to we got an entire nation trying to rename things that never needed renaming,
that never
never
needed.
should have been renamed,
Because what did
including
we always say when we
from
were in the
statues to
military?
gender.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
right. What did we always say when we were in the military? That we always felt like there was somebody that was just making up acronyms, right? Like their entire job was to
Yeah.
sit there and just make acronyms up to like rename things. It's the exact same thing, right?
Right.
But in society. So sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mean to
Oh,
interrupt you.
absolutely.
Just
No, that's fine. No, that's correct. I mean, if you confuse people with a bazillion pieces of errant language, um, then people don't really necessarily know what they're fighting, and we can go for hours on what that
and
means throughout our
yeah,
entire society. But
changing the
it's
definition of things, right?
if you take everything back to the standard, the foundation, and the truth, then calling it World War II, calling it full spectrum ops, calling it World War One. In the end, I've always been a proponent that every war starts out with the best of your technology and devolves over time to the point that if the war went on long enough, you'd have two people in a field trying to kill each other with sticks because the technology's now all been wasted and gone.
And all been used up
So,
and counteracted, right?
right, yeah, exactly. And so, my article on my Substack is about a revolution in military affairs, which kind of hits on the idea of warfare, manned versus unmanned, and artificial intelligence and things like that, and cautions about the fact that if war doesn't have a price, then people will be more apt to engage in it, and we have to be cautious. Nobody wants anybody to die, but if we don't recognize that there's a price to these things and seek other means to solve our problems, we'll just keep going back to that same hammer and nail problem, and
For sure.
human nature will just continue to dominate in that way. And if you want to ask who wants to go to war, who doesn't want to go to war, well, the military should be the first ones in the room always to raise their hand and say, "I don't."
I don't. I don't. It's always the people that have gone to war that are like, nope, I'm good. I'm all set. I
Right?
don't
I
really
don't
want to
care
do
what
that.
the Afghans do in Afghanistan, as
Right.
long as they're not here trying to do it here.
I don't want to do that again. I'm all set.
Sympathizing with the plight of people in Afghanistan to a certain point is okay, but is it our job as a nation to try to go quote fix them
Absolutely not.
when we're pretty well? We got lots of things broken here.
Plenty of
America
broken
first
things.
doesn't mean Germans shouldn't take Germany first. It doesn't mean Norwegians shouldn't say Norway first. It just means let's all work together to do the best we can for the people of our nations first, and then come together and have a healthy debate, have a healthy conversation in the world of diplomacy, and figure out how we can still do what's great for both of our countries, but not think we need to solve this thing through guns and artillery.
Yeah, for sure.
If there's a problem, even in the first place.
All right.
So
So I think we've answered the question pretty well. Um, I would like to ask you where can people find you?
there's a couple places that are my primary. One of them is under my name on Instagram, Darin Gaub, Gaub. Not too many of those out there. You can also just look up look up my name on Substack, and you'll find a couple hundred articles I've written over years on there. Those are probably the two easiest and two first places to look. And then my organization is called Restore Liberty. And you can go to restore-liberty.org, and you'll see myself and my co-founder, General Blaine Holt, retired also, Air Force this time. And you'll see what we're doing and what we're all about there.
Amazing. So we greatly appreciate you coming on, and I will put all that info in the show notes so people can find you, and if they have questions, they can reach out, right?
Yep.
We greatly appreciate it, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.
I will. I'm going to open the door of my truck here, go inside, and buy some ammo, so everything will be fine.
Awesome. And that wraps up another insightful episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the complex and fascinating world of military technology and its far-reaching impacts on civilian life. A huge thank you to Darin Gaub for sharing his expertise and invaluable insights with us today. His perspectives on national security and the interconnectedness of our military, economy, and culture have certainly given us a lot to think about. If you found today's discussion engaging, be sure to subscribe to Full Spectrum Frontiers on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us bring you more of the content you love. As always, you can follow us on social media for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and more engaging discussions. We're on list social media platforms, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue exploring the intersections of manufacturing, military, economy, politics, American culture, and life. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the frontiers of our world. I'm Bennett Tanton, and this has been Full Spectrum Frontiers. Thanks for listening.
You may be facing tribulation, but don't let it get you down. What I'm saying may take patience, but you're gonna make it out. I scratch my own 2 feet to pull you to safety. When the fires are burning